as Mazda's powerful rotary engine takes center stage, raising eyebrows and sparking debate. Could this revolutionary technology redefine the landscape of the EV industry at an interesting time when most automakers are facing the future with newer engine systems that offer better cost and efficiency? Mazda is looking into the past by revisiting its old and abandoned rotary engine. The rotary engine is an internal combustion engine using a different process. They have announced a new rotary engine with impressive features that could very well shake up the entire EV industry. But why take the risk of reviving a combustion failed system? And what makes Mazda so confident that it would succeed? Right now, the biggest and most powerful vehicle that Mazda has ever built. Join us as we explore the story behind the engine, the stunning upgrades they've made, and how it's expected to work. Rotors which function as pistons and fixed pinions, which determine the direction of the rotors. History of the rotor engine. The inspiring story behind Mazda's new engine goes way back to 1925. Ford's Model T at the time dominated the roads in terms of sales and performance, but had a heavy 4-cylinder engine that easily knocked and overheated. GM's Chevrolet Superior D series were pretty much dead on arrival because they had engines that weren't very reliable. Dodge cars were among the most powerful, but always rattled due to unbalanced piston parts and had annoying engines that needed frequent oiling and produced a lot of noise with overly excessive vibrations. The auto industry desperately needed a smoother and more efficient solution, and that was when the rotary engine came in. This engine was promised by famous engineer and visionary Felix Wankel, and he promised to accomplish this through NSU, a small German firm specializing in building the cheapest cars and motorcycles on the market. Felix Wankel was a famous engineer born back in 1902 who dreamed of proving everything. He had learned about traditional engines wrong. As early as age 17, he already had his idea for what would later become known as a rotary engine. This machine would not use pistons like regular car engines, but would rather spin in a circular motion that made engines lighter, smaller, and smoother than the regular ones that caused a lot of problems. When the idea struck his mind, Felix wasted no time in drawing out his ideas in a way he believed would never produce vibrations and loud sounds like most engines did. So from late 1925 to 1937, Felix got to work on making his wild dream a reality. But as expected, things weren't as simple as he envisioned. Though he had successfully built a lab in Heidelberg with the best engineers, his small pockets could afford. It wasn't until 1951 when he finally got the chance to take his work seriously. This was primarily because of the Second World War, and when things finally settled down in Germany, he didn't have the funds to keep his lab going and had to work for another company called NSU. And thanks to their expertise in making cars and motorcycles, Felix finally had access to much better tools and all the money he needed to bring his engine to live. Now this was where things got interesting. By late 1957, after years of dedication, hard work, Felix Wankel's engine ran for the first time. The company just watched in amazement as the engine ran in a triangle-shaped rotor spinning inside an oval chamber instead of pistons moving up and down like it was with traditional engines. Better yet, it created the same power cycles, but with fewer moving parts and less weight. This meant less fuel consumption and much better efficiency. At first, the machine overheated and almost fell apart. But thanks to his partner, Hans-Dieter Paschke, who made some adjustments to his earlier models, this addition worked perfectly without any of the issues that plagued the more popular engines made by Ford and GM. It was publicly demonstrated by NSU through a press conference not long after, and the event was a huge success that quickly got the attention of much bigger companies. Most of them wanted to closely observe and take notes on how the engine worked, so they could produce a better version of it by themselves. But only one company wanted to support NSU to make more editions of this engine and improve them with its bigger resources. Interestingly enough, the company that wanted to help them wasn't a German firm, but a Japanese carmaker based in Hiroshima called Mazda. This company was headed by Tsunji Matsuda, and he saw the engine's potential to make Mazda's best cars stand out globally from the much bigger brands, even though Mazda was much bigger than NSU. It too was known for making budget cars that were barely impressive to anyone. Their success was based on luck and affordability, and different new competitors were rising to take their spot. Tsunji Matsuda hoped the Wankel rotary engine would be the key to rising higher in the auto industry, and for a while he was correct. The first rotary engine made by Mazda was the 1967 Cosmosport 1.0S. It was relatively smaller than most marketed high-performance cars and ran on a twin-rotor engine. Many Japanese users claimed it was fun to drive, and it grew so popular in Europe and America because of how well it performed, despite being much smaller than most performance cars. As the years went by, Mazda continued improving their rotary engine and used it in upcoming models like the RX-3 and beyond. But perhaps the most famous rotary car was the RX-7. That launched in 1978, and it was the car that made rotary engines popular because it was one of the lightest, fastest, and most affordable automobiles in the mid-range market. It was reportedly so good that it garnered a cult following that lasted for decades. It was so successful that the RX series didn't launch the next generation until 2003 with the RX-8. This was a four-door sports car that was also marketed as a sports vehicle, but with more practical and impressive features for the average Joe. Mazda was still relatively successful with this launch, but sadly enough, it was also at this point where the cracks begin to show. Even though the more recent RX cars had the coolest designs and performance each upgrade caused, the machine to burn more gas than piston engines. On top of that, the engines weren't durable enough. This was because of the apex seals that kept the rotor inside the chamber. Due to the constant circular motion of engine parts, the seals wore out quite easily, causing the cars to gradually slow down in speed and overall performance with each passing year. Every upgrade tried to fix this by simply cranking up the performance of the newer models, and while that made up for the wear and tear of the engines, it also increased carbon emissions in the RX-6, RX-7, and RX-8 models. It also didn't help that the world was becoming increasingly aware of the dangers of carbon emissions on our climate during the 90s and early 2000s. And because of this, many countries came up with very strict rules on the kind of cars that were allowed into their borders. By 2012, when the RX-8 failed to meet most newer standards, Mazda stopped making rotary-powered cars entirely. All these issues beg the question, how did such a genius idea on paper quickly turn to a corporate nightmare for Mazda? What were the biggest flaws of this engine? And how does Mazda's newest edition promise to address each of them? As we shall see, most of the answers lie in the engine's design. How rotary engines work. As we know, a rotary engine works very differently from the kinds of auto engines we know today. Rotary engines use rotors that turn in a rate of circular motion inside a chamber that is shaped like a rounded triangle. Traditional engines, the first is intake, which works by pulling in air and fuel through a valve. The second step is compression, where the engine squeezes the air and fuel in a way that gets it ready to explode. And then we have combustion, the stage that starts by a spark that causes the explosion that pushes the pistons that drive the car forward. After the explosion comes the last stage that pushes out the leftover gas as smoke, so the process can start all over again. These steps happen one after the other. And the idea behind the rotary engine is for the machine to be able to perform all 4 stages at the same time with each full rotation of the rotor. As the rotor spins around the eccentric shaft, the space between the rotor and the chamber changes in size in a way that automatically starts all 4 stages. On paper, the idea was for engines to be smaller and lighter with fewer moving parts than piston engines. A typical rotary engine has only 3 moving parts, which are the rotor and 2 gears. This meant no valves, no camshaft, or longer timing systems. They were supposed to produce constant power with less fuel and were supposed to be the solution to the biggest problems with car engines. So where did everything go wrong? While on the surface it seemed Mazda's rotary engine was a bad idea, a closer look shows that it is still a practical concept. The only reason it failed back then was because it was rushed. You see, one of the biggest issues the rotor engines faced was sealing. On its own, the rotor has 3 sharp corners called apexes, and each of them has a small metal strip called an apex seal. What it does is keep the engine housing intact so the compression can produce the maximum amount of energy with each cycle. This meant that if the compression chamber had a leak that continued to expand, there would be less power and performance with the engine with each cycle. And then came the big problem. Since the rotor was always spinning and rubbing against the rubber walls of the chamber, the seals wore out much faster than piston rings and made the engine lose compression. These seals naturally wear out faster as the engine grows older, making the cars more difficult to start with each passing year, while also leading to faster fuel burning and much slower running during cold weather. The second flaw can be found in the old engine's oil system. Unlike traditional engines, rotary systems work by injecting oil into the combustion chamber to keep the apex seals lubricated. This oil burns along with the fuel, leading to more emissions and carbon buildup in shorter amounts of time. Because of how this issue only becomes obvious with older models, this loophole was difficult to notice by Felix Wankel, the creator of the engine, who thought it was the definitive solution to excessive carbon emissions and noise pollution. He also failed to notice that the emissions would eventually produce cogs that weaken the seal much further. It also doesn't help that the shape of the combustion chamber in the older rotary engines was very long and thin, making it hard to burn the fuel in an efficient way. Over time, this leads to wasted fuel and unburnt hydrocarbons going out through the exhaust. It was so bad back then that even the improved additions used in the RX X7 and RX8 models couldn't keep up with modern fuel economy while producing toxic amounts of smoke than normal piston engines. This leads us to the final issue that older rotary engines had to deal with, and strangely enough, that problem was heat. While new cars hardly struggled with higher temperatures, all it took was a few years for the Mazda cars to overheat. The reason behind this came from the compact engine block that had very little space for cooling channels. And this was bad news for a spinning rotor that produced a lot of heat at normal RPMs. If such an engine lacked a proper cooling system, then parts of the machine would easily overheat slowly, cooking itself alive until the seals and internal components become practically unusable. All these problems were why Mazda took careful consideration in choosing their engine for the upcoming RX-9. So they wanted to make a powerful vehicle that still used the rotor engine, but was both cost-effective and friendly to the environment. And this led to the development of their new engine running on the old Rotary system. So with all this in mind, stay with us as we break down the upgrades they've made with the new engine piece by piece. How the new engine works. Even though the announcement was made recently, work on this new engine began as far back as early 2013 at Mazda's Hiroshima headquarters in Japan, not long after their Rotary cars were discontinued in Europe and the United States. It started as a post-mortem analysis to find out what went wrong with the engine's original design by Felix Wankel and Hans-Dieter Paschus. In the middle of this long-term operation, Mazda had one goal in mind: produce an affordable engine that would bury Tesla in the rest of the competition. The first thing they focused on was the apex seals. For the RX-9 to live up to the hype, one key goal was to make the seals stronger and longer lasting than anything they had built before. While keeping the shape of the housing the same, the latest prototypes implied during the announcement would use ceramic coatings with carbon-infused alloys to reduce heat and wear out. And next, they redesigned the chamber by reforming the shape of the rotor faces. With wider holes and patterns on the surface of the rotors, there would be a better inflow of air and fuel for smoother ignition. But it doesn't stop there. The new engine promises to also give much better oil control than anything Mazda has ever produced before. This is because they plan on digitizing certain parts of the engine with advanced AI software that would detect the real-time need of the main parts of the machine and give just the right amount of oil at the right time. This would prevent over-lubrication and waste of oil while still protecting the seals from breaking apart. Today, they are testing systems that are able to recycle some of the vapor from the oil by sending it back through the engine so it could be used more efficiently. Through this method, Mazda hopes to solve the carbon emission issues that plagued the RX models of the previous generations. The new engine takes things a step further by integrating better cooling systems that circulate coolants in a more efficient way. Given the nature of the reports, it is most likely that the coolant would be a hybrid organic acid substance, supercharged with silicated additives to protect the metal parts of the engine. At a pH that works well with aluminum, it would also have a long life formula of at least 5 years or 150,000 miles with nanoceramic particles that naturally create a heat shielding layer over time. Through these methods, engines would potentially last longer with more usage than wearing out with high usage. But to be safe, Mazda also incorporates better heat resistant materials for the internal parts, including the rotors and side housings, to help the engine survive high speeds without warping when the natural layers of nanoceramic don't hold up. This leads us to perhaps the most interesting aspect of the new engine's design and architecture, and that is Mazda's new range extension system. To everyone's surprise, Mazda has chosen to use the Rotary engine as a range extender for future hybrid engines in other cars apart from the upcoming RX models. It would be their new system of combustion that is designed to give higher performance with very low input. How could this possibly work? By making the Rotary engine charge the electric motor through the car's battery. Instead of powering the wheels directly, like it was in older RX models and most traditional vehicles, the engine would run at a steady speed to control emissions and optimize fuel use, while also avoiding the high stress that plagued the previous RX models. Interestingly enough, this isn't the first time this idea was used by Mazda, as it was the blueprint for the Mazda 2 EV rotary range extender concept not too long ago. But as exciting as this is, Mazda isn't putting all its eggs in one basket. The firm has a much bigger plan in motion. Recent reports show that Mazda has 2 prototypes undergoing testing, and the second version of the new rotary engine delivers power directly to the wheels. This version is expected to be more powerful and produce at least 300 horsepower for a twin rotor setup of just over 1. The second version of the rotary engine is currently being tested in Japan and Europe, and insider reports imply Mazda intends to reveal the final version between both prototypes in the next few years. But even with this in mind, there is so much hype surrounding the upcoming engine that it's easy to forget that Mazda is plunging itself once again into a highly competitive market, where many companies have already gone far ahead in electric and hybrid technology. These companies are offering better features that even Mazda's upcoming engine might struggle to compete with. Let's start with perhaps the biggest threat to Mazda's new engine success, Tesla. Mazda's hurdles in competition. Tesla's EVs are the ones dominating the market today and have gone so far ahead in the game that the car that would likely compete with the rotary engine RX 9 model is almost 5 years old. This car is Tesla's Model S Plaid, and it was launched as far back as June 2021. It was a game changer, and it still dominates the game with an acceleration from 0 to 60 miles an hour in under 2 seconds. This is a feature that seems to outclass anything Mazda can put out at the moment. And this is because of a fundamental flaw that exists in every rotary engine, no matter how improved it is. And the problem is that a rotary engine cannot produce the same amount of torque in an instant that can be produced by an EV, even though it runs on a hybrid setup. Tesla has already shown the world how much power an EV can generate, and the results from as far back as 2021 have been nothing short of breathtaking. Simply put, a pure archi always generates more instant power than a hybrid vehicle. This is mostly because electric motors that aren't working in tandem with a subsystem that runs on fuel can deliver instant torque once the accelerator is pressed. The power it gives is quick and consistent because EVs are made to maximize the use of electric motors to convert electrical energy to mechanical energy with very little power loss along the way. A hybrid vehicle, on the other hand, had to deal with compromising some of the strengths of the electric motor for the internal combustion engine to be useful. So while the electric motor helps with efficiency, the combustion engine is still the main source of energy. By effect, since the power doesn't come directly from the electric motor, the upcoming RX-9 would likely not have the immediate torque response for instant acceleration. This wouldn't be an issue if the lineup used and planned for Mazda's upcoming engines were not marketed as smaller sports cars. If the older models in the current design were aimed at a casual market, this wouldn't be an issue. But either way, it's likely that Mazda's Rotary engine would likely not have what it takes to compete with Tesla's better power source used in the Model S Plaid. And it isn't the only company aggressively entering the EV market. Another major player that would be a problem for Mazda is Ford. And just like Tesla, it also has an older engine that would be able to compete with Mazda's upcoming powerhouse. This is the engine used in the Mustang Mach-E, a car that was released in December 2020. This SUV was so good with customers that it gave Tesla's competing Model Y a run for its money, with the GT Performance Edition completely blowing off the competition. On top of that, Chevrolet's Bolt EV has been on the market since 2017 and got an upgrade in 2022, yet it continues to be one of the most affordable EVs on the market, with a range of over 250 miles. Though its engine doesn't offer as much performance as that promised by Mazda's upcoming machine, it is the most likely option for buyers who are affected by rising gas prices in today's economy. The only chance Mazda has at beating this cheaper vehicle with less performance is if gas prices reduce before the machine launches, with the RX-9 at least 2 years from now. Chevrolet's Bolt E-Vive stands today as the best shift for EVs becoming mainstream, and it has a firm hold on a market that Mazda's Rotary engine will surely struggle to penetrate. The internal combustion nature makes it much harder to compete with EVs with longer ranges and lower costs. But what about the luxury models? Does Mazda stand a chance of winning in that regard? Let's find out. Will it succeed? The best way to know this is by comparing it with another force within the EV industry that it is projected to dominate, and that is Lucid Motors. With their Lucid Air Sedan Dream Edition that launched in October of 2021, we have an engine that goes on a total range of over 500 miles on a single charge. This goes above and beyond anything a rotary engine can offer in terms of fuel efficiency, and that only scratches the surface of what the Lucid Air has to offer, with an acceleration reaching 60 miles per hour in 2.4 seconds. Even a much newer EV company is projected to outperform Mazda's RX-9 with their 4-year-old R1T electric pickup truck that was also released in late 2021. It gives over 300 miles of range with an acceleration to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds. Still from 2021, we have the highly beloved Volkswagen ID.4. It has many features Mazda's rotary engine, at this stage, would struggle a lot with including high-tech features that would likely not be found in the RX-9 due to the limitations of the rotary system. BMW's Deus iX launched in November of that same year and would stand as a difficult rival for the RX-9 through its higher performance. It gets almost concerning when we notice that Toyota's upcoming Biza 4X is the latest car with an engine that could compete with what Mazda has in store today, and it came out in June 2022. From these examples alone, it's clear that re-entering the market would be very tough for Mazda, especially with the problems that plague the Rotary system still present today when compared to the mode advanced systems that came afterwards. So with these examples in mind, how would Mazda destroy the EV industry when it runs on a far outdated system? The answers are complicated, so let's break them down. To stand out in this highly competitive market, Mazda has to be very bold and aggressive with its approach. They would have to come up with a unique and innovative solution that handles also the problems that would be caused by their rotary system. Mazda's challenge boils down to two major problems: offering a car that is environmentally friendly while also staying true to the thrilling driving experience its brand is known for. To do this, Mazda could make themselves stand out by making the RX-9 a bit different, with a higher focus in sporty handling and agile performance than the much higher range and fast acceleration that Tesla is known for. This means that Mazda would have to be careful with their marketing of the RX-9 as a sports car by focusing more on safety and comfort over speed and thrills. The RX-9 would need to be the perfect balance that can appeal to anyone willing to try, but that isn't the only challenge they would have to address. For example, let's say the plan works and many people choose to buy the RX-9 over Tesla's Model S Plaid. Mazda's biggest challenge once that happens would be keeping up with the massive production abilities of Tesla. Mazda will more than likely struggle with mass production once their products get in high demand. The only way to keep their RX-9 and future models in high demand would be by making their vehicles affordable from the start without sacrificing the quality of the promised driving experience. This means selling their cars at a loss for a short amount of time if necessary. If Mazda can take the hit by offering a more budget-friendly hybrid that doesn't compromise in performance, the company would likely grab the attention of price-sensitive customers who like EVs but struggle to choose because of how expensive they usually are. Another good strategy considered by Mazda is tapping into the growing demand for smaller vehicles that could easily fit in tight parking spaces. While the company has always been known for making sports-themed cars that were smaller than most others from the competition, they weren't suitable for urban environments and users who didn't care much about that aesthetic. On top of that, the best high-performance models are known for being larger than regular cars in ways that are behind practical. Take the Tesla Model S, for example. Even though it is a sedan, it is still relatively long compared to other cars that are typically used in cities. It also becomes a pain to use in crowded urban areas where parking spots are smaller and more limited. Mazda could capitalize on this by making the RX-9 more compact and efficient in a way that instantly catches the attention of potential customers and fans of EVs. One of the key aspects of Mazda's vision for the RX-9 is to drastically improve the battery life and range of the model. In fact, two of the most important factors buyers generally think about when buying an EV is the charging speed and battery life. Range anxiety is a problem that has lasted as long as the EV industry. So much so that it has become part of the daily lives of people who rely on electric cars. Love it or hate it, every user who heavily relies on EVs prepares for the worst with almost every long drive at this point. But Mazda could benefit more if they focus on making their cars compact enough to rely on smaller batteries that charge faster but still produce the same results as the much heavier Tesla models with supercharging capabilities. But even with all that, Mazda as a brand is still a much smaller player in the EV market with fewer resources compared to Tesla. However, that doesn't mean they can't dominate the market as promised. If they focus on building a hybrid vehicle that appeals to specific customer needs that aren't provided by pure EVs, they wouldn't need to outclass Tesla in anything, but still find success by carving out its own space in the rapidly expanding industry. So what do you think? Will Mazda dominate the EV industry with their new Rotary engine, or will the project crash and burn like it did over a decade ago? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.